Welcome to a new edition of the Neon Jazz interview series with jazz violinist Mads Tolling. He was born in Copenhagen, Denmark, and came to the Berklee College of Music in Boston. These days, he is internationally renowned as a two-time Grammy Award-Winner and the 2016 DownBeat Critics Poll Rising Star, winning the violin category. He just released 2017's Playing the 60s, and for 9 years was in the Turtle Island Quartet. This new album is a great one. He has gone on to span the globe with his blend of jazz and has plenty of stories to back it all up. So get to know Mads and dig this interview, my friends.
Mads, thank you for taking a minute out for me today. I appreciate it.
Yeah, no problem at all. My pleasure.
So let me ask you, first of all, I know there's always a lot going on with you, but your latest album, Playing the 60s, talk to me about this album. What is your fascination with the 60s? Why did you decide to do this project?
For me, I grew up watching a lot of the shows that we take the music from. I grew up watching Meet the Flintstones and Mission Impossible, and then, of course, the movie Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. So from my childhood, I had a lot of these songs in my head, so to speak. And then, furthermore, it's like such an important time, in American history, in the world, in the history of the world, because you had, the civil rights, you had Vietnam, you had a lot of conflicts, and things were kind of being worked out on that level, and sort of similar to today. So I feel what can happen a lot of times when you have a lot of conflict, you can have some good things come out of it. And that's certainly what happened in music, is you had all this amazing music that took place, from the Beatles to Motown to, world music being sort of a thing in the 60s, them all kind of coming together. And that's where I took my inspiration. So kind of like my interest as a kid, and as well as my, the interest with the period as a whole.
So you were raised in Copenhagen, Denmark, and moved to the United States when you were 20. Talk to me about your childhood in Denmark and how you got so interested in jazz.
Yeah, I grew up in Copenhagen, Denmark, and started playing the violin at 6. Basically just playing Suzuki violin, as you're supposed to play classical music. Played my Mozart and Haydn, and then at one point, my dad came to me with a cassette tape of Miles Davis. We were actually traveling around the world at that time on a trip. My parents wanted me to see, all these countries that you would normally not necessarily go to, like Thailand and Indonesia. And I think we were in Thailand, and he gave me this cassette tape of Miles Davis playing Autumn Leaves. And when I heard that, it just really grabbed me. Somehow it connected with me on another level than I had before with classical music for some reason. So I was so interested in doing this that I, kept figuring out how to play those phrases on my violin. So I started messing around with that sound and playing some of the jazz tunes. And then, about in February this year, there was a guy called Sven Dasmussen who passed away at the age of 100. And he was a major influence on me. He was a wonderful jazz violinist, and I went to see him too shortly after I started listening to Miles, and it kind of all came together. I realized you can actually play jazz on a violin, it's possible. And then, of course, Stefan Grappelli and Stuff Smith and these other jazz violinist greats I started listening to, and it all kind of fell into place, and I was on this journey to figuring out how to play jazz on a violin.
So was it a culture shock for you to come to Berklee, to come to Boston to study music here in America?
It was in a way, because it was kind of a different scene that I'm used to. Denmark is a small country, kind of protected scene. You're used to just going through what everybody goes through, but all of a sudden you're changing paths. You're going to another country. You're not used to the customs. You're not used to the language as much, although I did speak English, in school, so that's one of the good things I had. But certainly not knowing a single soul, I didn't know anybody in the U.S. I had no family. I had no friends, when I came, so it took me a while to adjust as a 19, 20-year-old. That took a little bit of getting used to, but I think that was a good thing for me, and for anybody to just kind of step into your own scene and figure out how you can make things work. And that's really what music is all about, is making the network and connecting with people from scratch in a way, you know, because if you're new in the country, they don't, you know, you kind of have to play your way through it, so to speak, and I did that.
So talk to me about your quartet. You've performed all over the place, and you've been together for quite a while. Give me an insight into how this started and how it's going with the quartet.
Right, yeah, I've had this quartet for about, let's see, it's about 8 or 9 years, and it started being this group with guitar even. There was guitar, bass, and drums, and violin, of course, and then that kind of developed into what it is now with the piano instead. Yeah, in the beginning we were doing a little bit more of a fusion repertoire. We were even playing some music by Jean-Luc Ponty, doing some of his albums. I had a lot of originals, which we still play some of. And yeah, you know, it's slowly but surely developed into being more of a touring band. You know, in the beginning it was mainly in the San Francisco Bay Area, but now when we go to Japan, I go to Denmark and play a lot in Sweden, Norway, and so forth around the U.S., of course. Really, with this latest project, also kind of opening up to a different thing with all these 60s songs. The neat thing about it is it's, you know, songs that everybody knows, but not the way we do it. You know, we do these, like, you know, Afro-Cuban version of All Along the Watchtower and you know, kind of a reggae version of The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. So we really run the gamut, and that, by the way, has always been the point of this group, is being able to mix the genres into something that makes sense at the end result. Hopefully makes sense to everybody.
So who were your inspirations on, you know, the violin is kind of a specialized instrument in the world of jazz. Who have been, you've mentioned Miles in the beginning, but who have been your jazz inspirations?
Right. Yeah, Miles certainly a big inspiration. You know, early on, Stefan Grappelli. I even went so far as when I was entered this competition where this Danish bass player Niels Henning Øster Petersen, that died about 10 years back, but was one of the greats in jazz. He was a judge at this competition, and I played a Stefan Grappelli solo, note for note. And actually, funny enough, because Niels Henning played on that recording, and he didn't recognize. He gave me first prize, but that was like my first journey into figuring out how to play jazz, because it's an important part of playing jazz is imitation, figuring out what other people do so you can imitate their style, figure out before you kind of add your own sound to it. So early on, it was certainly Stefan Grappelli, you know, Sven Asmussen, as I mentioned, Jean-Luc Ponty also, and then I'm all very inspired by horn players. So John Coltrane, I did this whole project on I Love Supreme, and we played that in Turtle Island Quartet that I was a part of, and won a Grammy for that. So Coltrane is very big for me, and Keith Jarrett, Herbie Hancock, Pat Metheny, you know, the greats of jazz. Certainly I've listened a ton to.
So if you could get into a time machine and go back and see one of these performers live, who would you go see?
Oh, man, that's a great question. I mean, I probably would have to say Miles. That would be a close between Miles and Coltrane, because they, you know, and I mean, seeing Coltrane play a Love Supreme or play, you know, My Favorite Things or something like that. I mean, I think that would probably perhaps be the thing, you know, because of the spiritual force that he was drawing from, and just the depth of his improvisation. I think and I think about Miles, then I think about a great band leader and a guy that was extremely smart at putting projects together and arranging and finding the cats that could really play together. So for different reasons, I would see one of those two, I think.
So why do you love jazz?
I think it goes back to just the core of when I listened to that Miles Davis tape when I was 14. I think what struck me right away was the intimacy and it's sort of all the layers of anything superficial or anything unessential is rolled away, because you're hearing a guy's soul and hearing what he has to say on his instrument, in the spur of the moment. So it's like the ultimate conversation that you're hearing. It's something that's prepared. Sure, people know the harmonies and they know the melodies and stuff, but what it really boils down to is be able to react in real time to something that's going on. And I think that's really exciting. And if you understand that conversation, and I know jazz is not the easiest thing to understand, but if you start like listening to it and really picking it up, it's one of the most amazing things to witness. And that's why I really love it. But I also love other types of music for different reasons. But jazz is great for that reason.
So what's the future for you? What do you see happening? What are you looking forward to see happening, say, in a decade from now?
For me right now, I'm in this position where I've done a few different projects. I've lately the Mads Men, but I've also written a symphony, actually a violin concerto that was performed by Oakland Symphony that I'm playing now with different symphonies. We're taking it to Japan and around the U.S. and so forth. So writing and composing for symphonies, integrating the jazz sound, integrating, a little bit of, fiddle styles and boogie-woogie and that sort of thing into the symphony. It has been a big priority for me also because, again, my experience learning jazz when I was a kid, I feel like I want to give that back to string players who are not necessarily used to that experience. And a lot of people, it can be a real eye-opener and really exciting for people who've never improvised to kind of get there. So I enjoy that part, and certainly getting into the more symphonic world works with me for that. But certainly my heart is in getting my group happening and collaborating with different artists. An exciting thing on the Mads Men album was also working with some great vocalists, Kenny Washington and Spencer Day. So involving the vocals into, jazz and having the word, which is a great way, I think, for people to relate to jazz is important for me too. So collaborations with great musicians, wherever it's possible. I'm going to play a couple of sit-in with Jean-Luc Ponty here in June on a couple of his gigs and when he's in the Bay Area. So those types of experiences are super valuable for me and hopefully for people listening to it.
So everyone has a version of who you are, your family, your friends, and your fans. But when you wake up and face the world, who do you think you are?
That's again, it's a great question because you're this sort of, you have these different roles, and these different identities that constantly come out throughout your day and throughout your life. And a lot of times as a musician, you end up wearing sort of the business hat quite a bit too, because you're always finding the next opportunity. Because playing music and doing music all the time is, of course, what you ideally want to do, but you do have to create these opportunities, especially with the way things are in the music business. You don't get a lot of stuff handed on a silver platter. It probably never happened that way, but you have to always think about how to, get the next gig and record and get the word out about what you're doing. So a fair bit of that is start thinking of yourself also as that, as this kind of entrepreneurial dude, who tries to make stuff happen. And then certainly, the creative side. I also love to play. Tennis. So I'm a big sports fan. So I'll kind of get into the whole sports thing with tennis and basketball and watching the Warriors play. When they do the basketball. So yeah, that's a little bit about me and what I like to do. Being outside too and nature, hiking around too, is a big thing I love to do.
Speaking of hiking, you climbed to the top of Mount Kilimanjaro with your dad in Tanzania. What was that like?
It was an amazing experience because it was probably the hardest experience I've ever had. I mean, the time where I felt the worst in my life in some ways, but at the same time the most exhilarating, amazing experience I've had, because I've got really severe what do you call that, when you're suffering from a lack of oxygen and you're way up in this altitude of, I think it's 19,000 feet, which Denmark, the highest hill is 400 feet. So fighting some demons there and some things I was not used to at all. So it really affected me with that. And I remember I was down on the ground and I said I can't go any further now. And my dad was saying, we're almost there. And this guy came over and looked at me and said, "Oh, he's fine." So we went to the top and it was an incredible experience. And boy, those are the types of things you're glad you did. But I'm not sure I would do it again.
Yeah, absolutely, without a doubt. That right there, I think that's a good way to wrap everything up. Mads, thank you for taking some time out, opening up about your world and your music. I appreciate it.
Absolutely, Joe.
Thanks for listening and tuning in to yet another Neon Jazz interview, where we give you a bit of insight into the finest players in New York, Kansas City, and spots all over the world, giving fans all that jazz. And thanks to Mads for his time, honesty, and stories. If you want to hear more interviews, go to Famous Interviews with Joe Domino on the iTunes Store. Visit neonjazz at youtube.com. And for everything Neon Jazz, go to the neonjazz.blogspot.com. Until next time, enjoy the jazz, my friends.
Neon Jazz.